I feel lucky and I think very privileged to be in a position that I am now in this sort of culture and in this community of like other like-minded people that we all went through very similar things, and here we are now not only making money from doing it but meeting people and meeting friends and having like-minded people be part of our lives for something that means a lot, that might have affected you differently when you were younger.
Hello, and welcome to a special micro episode of the BandWagon podcast for the week of May 19th, 2025. On this edition of the program, a brief note about scheduling. The last time I released a very small version of this podcast instead of a standard length, standard format episode was back in December, when I thought that the computer that drives this podcast's production might not have been long for this world. Never fear, knock on wood, the thing is up and running, very much alive. As it works out, I'm very glad I didn't go buy a new one because, well, no need, happily. This past week, my schedule got a little hairy and I fretted. How the heck is episode 62 going to get done? But then, this very past week, one of my favorite podcasters had a schedule snafu and so opted to post a rerun. I noted that I had that previous episode of his on my hard drive already, no need to download again, and I smiled and thought, yeah, there's a lesson there. As Kyle Smith noted when we shared a conversation a few months ago, which ended up being a crossover episode with his Growing Band Director podcast, consistency is the key. If you're one of those regular listeners whose Monday morning routine includes downloading and listening, you no doubt expect there to be something to download and listen to. It's been that way for more than a year. Otherwise, there's a chance that the seed gets planted in your mind that, well, BandWagon may or may not be there every Monday morning, and perhaps that gives your subconscious a bit of permission to not check in so assiduously. No! So this is new content, just not a super lot of it. But it's something anyway. Although the aspiration was to have a shiny new episode every single Monday for the rest of time, apparently life intervenes sometimes. In my case, this week, nothing major, just a whole lot of moving parts, not all of which stayed on their appointed rails, and you really don't want to hear any more excuses. This so far has not been riveting content worthy of a podcast award. Yes, there are podcast awards given out every year, like Emmys, and no, I haven't submitted this program for one of those, mainly because you have to pay to make yourself eligible to be nominated, and what kind of scam is this? I don't need some big shot organization to validate my work. That's what dear listeners are for. I do reserve the right to disavow any knowledge of that last paragraph if I ever am up for some podcast award somewhere. History is written by the winners, after all. So, go find your liars in your flip folders. Memorial Day parades are coming, after all. And away we go. Let's play a chorale. Beethoven made a career out of thwarting expectations, so why can't I? Predictable consistency versus delightful surprise. Anyway, at a couple of moments in this podcast's 15 or so months of life, I have made mention of the other nerd interest that I have, which is, of course, space, the final frontier. Speaking of predictable. In addition, I've specifically pointed to a podcast called Trekculture, which is based in the UK and involves a small rotating cast of characters who report the latest news in that area, make occasional commentary, tell jokes, and conduct interviews with people in the Trek world who are either doing exciting things or just have a history with the subject. Sounds familiar. You know, Trekwagon. Well, in the Trekculture episode that dropped last week, that gang held an extended conversation that acknowledged May 12th through May 18th being designated Mental Health Awareness Week in the UK. The podcast's co-hosts were talking about their childhoods and being very much into nerdy things at that time, in some cases Star Trek, but in this moment they were all comparing notes about having been young fans of the TV show Doctor Who, and about having been made fun of, even bullied, by their peers because of it. Sounds familiar. One of the co-hosts, Tom Roberts-Finn, began that conversation this way.
To celebrate Mental Health Awareness Week, I thought it would be interesting for us just to chat about our own experiences with mental health and Star Trek and fandom and community and that sort of thing. I grew up being sort of very much into nerdy things. When I was growing up, I was extremely into like comic books and superheroes. I was a big fan of Doctor Who, and I used to get made fun of for watching Doctor Who when I was at school, when it was like new. I mean, even then, but now I remember thinking like, what a weird thing to make a child making fun of another child for watching one of the most popular TV shows ever made in the UK, at least. And yeah, I had just a lot of experience of being othered, even more so, and sort of bullied in cases and that sort of thing, for being part of this sort of community, which I think, affected me a lot as a child, but I didn't really realize it until I sort of got older. But the great thing about it is that now, being older, approaching my 30s, I am a part of that sort of same community in a different way, in an online space. And obviously things have changed since then. I think sort of nerdom culture has had a huge shift in like the last 10, 15 years into something that is now popular. I've seen people that would have made fun of me at school, like going to see the new Avengers movie, and I'm like, what happened? What changed that I wasn't aware of? I feel lucky and I think very privileged to be in a position that I am now in this sort of culture and in this community of like other like-minded people that we all went through very similar things. And here we are now, not only making money from doing it, but meeting people and meeting friends and having like-minded people be part of our lives for something that means a lot, that might have affected you differently when you were younger.
Swap out Doctor Who and Star Trek and swap in band, and swap out the part about now in later life making money, talking about Trek and Doctor Who and sci-fi and comic books and things, and swap in being a band director or playing in a community band. And this is indeed very familiar territory for most of us, isn't it? Another of the Trekculture co-hosts, Ellie Littlechild, expounded on this.
Doctor Who, when we were kids, I feel like a lot of people did watch it. I think the difference came where most of the other kids grew out of it and then I didn't. So then I'm getting to university and I'm still going on about Doctor Who. And I did find some friends who kind of did enjoy it as well, but it was still kind of like that thing that they know about you because you're the nerdy one. There's a lot to be said for school environments, whether it be school or university, but in those sorts of environments where you're forced to be with people who have all different frames of mind, all different kind of walks of life, and you're just forced to be with them. Even if you're on a course at uni where you're all like-minded on this one topic, you have to be around them and they are all different. Once you kind of get beyond that and you're just in your everyday life, it's much easier for you to kind of decide who you want to be around. And once you kind of get your head around that, it's much easier. And I do feel like now I'm so glad that I didn't necessarily change the way I was.
Again, swap out Doctor Who and Star Trek and swap in band, and this also is familiar territory for a lot of us. As I listened to Ellie Littlechild talk about this, I did, of course, find myself mentally drifting toward thoughts of how her story lined up, or didn't, with my own experience. She talked about the upside of school or university environments, namely throwing like-minded people together in activities or shared interests. For me, it was a revelation when I went from high school to college. My high school band was a group in which a few of us band kids were super invested, but it seemed as if most of the rest were much closer to, yeah, we do this, but not always because we're super invested in it. We like it fine, but it doesn't define our lives, and if it went away, we'd find something else to do. Which I, of course, understood not at all. So I arrived at my first collegiate preseason band camp, looked around, and realized, oh, all 230 of these people are continuing to do band after high school, which means no one is forcing them to do it. And at a university this big, there are probably tons of activities to get involved in, so this is a choice for them, just like it's a choice for me. This is what it might look like if my entire high school graduating class consisted of nothing but band geeks. As Michael Coogan said early on in the BandWagon time, I found my tribe. And then, when I headed out into the big wide world outside of a school setting for the first time in a great many years, first job, meeting new people, etc., etc., I suddenly wasn't literally surrounded by band people anymore. And while it wasn't a case of being outright bullied, still, the average coworker of mine was not nearly as well versed in or even aware of the band activity, some of them, except for the stereotypes that went with it in the general American culture. And this was just before Mr. Holland's Opus, and very much before the movie Drumline. It was still that world of, oh, you did band in school? Oh, that's that oddball activity, isn't it? And maybe people would inch away, or at least certainly wouldn't, ask questions about it so as to maybe learn more. In my case, I was lucky enough to still be associated with my college band, both as a musical arranger and as a person whose sister went to the same college and marched with the same band and the same people. And then as time went on, it went from, oh, Kristen is my sister, to, hi, I'm Kristen's brother, nice to meet you. And I made lots of those people into my acquaintances and then friends, all of whom also got band. Not to mention being brought onto the Drum Major Academy staff, and talk about a great way of keeping current with the band activity and with some great people in it. For whatever reason, it took me a solid 35 years to get into a community band and actually, do band again, and experience the effect of being surrounded by like-minded people. Those kind of like-minded people. Anyway, that Trekculture podcast got me thinking, and that's what it got me thinking about. And perhaps you have a similar personal history, a shared history with other band folks, and also experiences with people who, get band less. I'm all ears as far as those go. Contact links are all at the heyband.podbean.com website, where you can tell those tales by email or voice message, and perhaps that's a feature for a future episode. So that's my short subject for this abbreviated episode. Thanks for continuing to listen. It's not going to be very long before this podcast hits 5,000 downloads, and that is no small thing. And it's all because of every dear listener there is. I didn't do any of those downloads myself. That's cheating. You did. And please, never let me go terribly long before I reiterate my thanks to you for that. That's BandWagon for this week. Thanks as always for downloading and listening. You can always listen to more episodes at the pod's website, heyband.podbean.com. The link to BandWagon's merch store is still alive and kicking, thanks to the good folks at TeePublic. Please continue to share the show on social media, and thank you so much for that. For now, take care, stay in touch, stay in tune, and we'll do this all again next week, just in a more fulsome way. I'm Rob Hammerton. Detail, Fallout.